Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Schneider, and I want to welcome you to today's episode 178 of Say What?, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the law firms on the front lines of combating those threats on behalf of children and their parents in the nation's courtrooms. Here to talk about this is someone eminently qualified, as he's been leading the charge in this regard long before it became popular discussion on the nightly news. Attorney Robert Tyler has been instrumental in the furtherance of religious and other constitutional liberties through direct education of government officials and the prosecution of many state and federal lawsuits. In 2005, he founded Advocates for Faith and Freedom, a nonprofit law firm dedicated to the protection of constitutional liberties, with a particular focus on faith-based liberties grounded in the First Amendment. Robert has been named one of the nation's most influential lawyers and is regularly called upon to be interviewed by media outlets across the nation. Robert Tyler, welcome to Say What?
It's an honor to be with you, Mark.
It's great to have you on the program, Robert. I guess to start off, besides leading your nonprofit, I know that you manage a commercial law firm where you practiced for many decades. So what led you to found Advocates for Faith and Freedom? Was there a particular impetus?
Well, Mark, I went to law school, frankly, with the idea that I would engage in constitutional liberty work. Going all the way back to 1992 when I started law school. I went in with the idea that I would be involved in defending constitutional liberties and most specifically religious liberties. And in doing so, I got out of law school in a lot of debt and realized I can't really afford to do this. It's most of this work is pro bono work because those who need the help can't afford it. And so, eventually, started doing, pro bono work on, late nights and that sort of thing in the late 90s. And then 2002, I went to work for another legal organization. I was asked to be their first litigator, one of the larger ones. And then in 2005, I decided, we really needed, to work. In particular, California is where a lot of this is starting, and wanted to focus. Since then, we're all over the country as well now, but at this point, it was 2005 when we decided, maybe we need to just start a nonprofit organization to raise money to be able to do this, and that was it. I mean, it really goes back to even before I went to law school, frankly.
Really interesting. So your impetus for starting your commercial firm was to fund your real passion, which is defending people who are having Christian liberty issues.
Yeah, our model is quite different than many. And in 2005, when we launched the nonprofit Advocates for Faith and Freedom, I also realized that I had a lot of clients from generating over the last 7 years or so, and I thought to myself, I'm going to run a hybrid model where we help fund our nonprofit through my for-profit law practice, and ever since that's how it's worked. We've got about 12 lawyers total. I've got 4 lawyers working on the nonprofit alone, and the other lawyers are working in the for-profit side. We even do business, real estate, corporate work. We represent a ton of ministries, lots of churches, because it kind of goes hand in hand with the other work we do on the for Advocates for Faith and Freedom. But the other practice is called Tyler Law, and in Tyler Law we do a lot of various work, and we wind up representing lots of like-minded people in that side of the practice too.
And what is the scope of your representation geographically? You mentioned that you have or at least a presence in other states. Is that true?
We have a case all the way out in Maine right now, probably going to trial in a few months. Maine and Maryland and Missouri. We wind up getting phone calls from around the country, and So depending on the case, we'll consider taking it. We actually have, interestingly, with COVID hitting, actually even before COVID, we started preparing ourselves to be able to do video conferencing. And then COVID hit, and it kind of forced even more other folks to be able to be ready and able to do video conferencing. And so we now have, I've got lawyers spread out around Southern California, Malibu to South Orange County to way out in Riverside, out in Fontana and Chino Hills and Marietta. And we're able to, we work, very, very well. I even have 2 attorneys in Arkansas, 1 in Tennessee. And so actually I even have an attorney that works for Advocates for Faith and Freedom who lives full time in Korea.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it's been, it's been interesting and it's very helpful for us because as you know, being a lawyer, there's not a lot of lawyers who are like-minded, are willing to do the kind of work we do and sacrifice and probably make half of what we might otherwise make. So finding those lawyers spread out is great. It really opens things up for us to be able to have good, passionate lawyers.
Well, you've obviously been able to attract that base of attorneys. And I don't know if we already mentioned this to our listening audience, but the focus of your law firm is based in Southern California area, specifically San Diego. So, Robert, I want to talk about some of the current cases that you're litigating, but maybe you can tell us about some of the more memorable cases you've litigated in the past. For example, you were recently able to secure a fairly sizable settlement on behalf of a wrongfully terminated Haruba School District teacher, Jessica Tapia, who we recently interviewed on this program. Can you remind our listeners about that case, how you got involved, what led up to the settlement, and anything that you think would be of value to our listeners to hear?
Sure. She contacted me after being referred by a couple prominent folks that she was in touch with, and it was, Jack Hibbs and Charlie Kirk, and she was in meeting with them. And, when you get a referral, both of them, she felt, she obviously felt comfortable when you get credible people like that giving a referral. So she called up and we talked, and she was with another organization at the time and decided to move over. And we don't do much advertising. We're not on the radio. We're places trying to, find business. Frankly, the Lord just brings the clients to us. I'm so often amazed when I realize what case we're working on, what the issue is. And it's just God bringing it to us. So Jessica, what happened was she was being threatened with her job because she was being told at the school district that the high school that she went to, that she graduated from with honors and was, a rule follower, just a really good student. And, she goes off to college and comes back and eventually teaches at the same high school, known by her peers, which, was the administration and teachers before. Yeah. And they told her that, if you are not willing to call, if you're not willing to use the proper pronouns, excuse me, I shouldn't use the word proper. If you're not willing to use the pronoun of the choice of the child, then you're going to lose your job. You can't do that. You're going to be disciplined. And it all came about because Jessica had put on her social media, her views on some of the issues that were going on with, and it wasn't necessarily directed at kids, but one of the videos, she was in one store, a major retailer, and there was information there that, or I guess it was, they were trying to do something with the clothing, and, it was Target or Kohl's or something like that. And we all know what went on in those. And she just put a video, said, this is wrong. What are they trying to do to our kids? And then
this is on her personal social media channel, right?
Yeah, it sure was. And then one of her children, one of the kids in the school saw this and made a big deal. And, oh my gosh, she's this, she's going to be a homophobe. She's transphobe. She's all of this phobe. and then complains to the administration. And she was a physical education teacher. She never had a student that actually asked her to use a different pronoun. Never had a student who asked her to use the locker room, the opposite locker room of their sex. And yet the administration came to her and tried to address the issues with her. And she said, well, look, I've got free speech. I have a religious objection to this. I'm willing to do something different. You want to, I'll use, if this were to happen, by the way, not that it never happened. If this were to happen and some student came to me and wanted to use the opposite pronoun of their sex, then I would, instead be willing to use their first name or call them by their last name.
She did her best to try to accommodate the school district.
Absolutely. And then
even though, by the way, there was no actual incident where a student was asking or desiring to be used by a quote preferred pronoun. So this was all sort of hypothetical.
All hypothetical. And so they ended up terminating her, even after she asked for her own accommodation. And they ended up terminating her. And so, this is something that we're seeing, and we ended up the school district ended up settling and paid in excess of $400,000, close to $500,000 if I'm not mistaken. What ended up happening here is that, it's important because financially it's important. Sometimes you can go to trial and you can risk losing, even the best of cases. And it came down to, we were involved in a settlement negotiation, and, I felt that, it was, the school district was paying out enough money that it's going to make an impact, and it's going to make an impact not only here, but elsewhere. When school districts are paying out significant dollars for violating someone's rights as a teacher, others are going to wake up and realize that, we better not, because it makes the school district look pretty bad.
Right.
And so that is what happened. And then soon after that, we had another case that's come before us. And this is a gentleman who's suing the Glendale School District. And this man was a year from retirement. And he himself just came out and he went to a school board meeting to speak against the transgender ideology that they were pushing. And his name's Mr. Shelton, and Mr. Shelton himself actually is gay. He's an older gentleman, 1 year from retirement. He says, problem here is that this just doesn't make biological sense, and we looked at it, and we're a faith-based organization. And, I thought to myself, this is the perfect client, because you can't use the gay hammer that, oh my God, you're just,
he's homophobic, transphobic, something like that. You can't use that against him.
But they will anyways, right? I mean, they'll pull out the gaslighting and say something that he's not really gay, like Ben Carson really isn't black, that kind of thing. And so we're in the middle of that case. What happened there is they sidelined him for the last year of his job and told him, you can't attend any school graduations. You can't see your kids. You've got to stay away because, oh boy, he's a threat because he spoke out against the agenda in the school board meeting when the issue was on the agenda. And so, what we're seeing, these are major issues. And, you might, this stuff really goes back to 2007. A lot of people are like, wow, this came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, Joe Biden's president and everyone's turning trans. All of a sudden it's trans. This stuff, Mark, I'm sure you're aware of the origins that this didn't start, in 2020 or 2018 or anything of that nature. This goes all the way back to the first bill in California in 2007.
Yes. And in fact, we often make the point on this program that the seeds of big social changes, they don't happen quickly. They're often planted many years, if not many decades in advance, and their roots sort of expand underground until they come to the surface and have their influence. In fact, there's There are similar cases around the country around these preferred pronoun issues where brave teachers are standing up and saying, no, we're not going to do this. This is not rooted in science. It's not rooted in reality. Constitutionally, it's problematic. In fact, you're probably familiar with the case of Peter Vlaming. I think he's from Virginia, who years ago was terminated by his school district for his refusal to use preferred pronouns. And he also received, I don't think your firm was representing him in this case, but another firm was, but he also received a fairly healthy settlement.
Yeah, that was recently settled, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So, Robert, I wanted to ask you, it seems to me that school districts know that if these cases, if they don't settle and they keep litigating and these cases go to an appellate level, that the higher they go, the more problematic it's going to be for them, because as soon as, one of the circuit courts comes out against these parental secrecy exclusion policies and forcing teachers to use preferred pronouns, that's going to be bad for all school districts in that particular jurisdiction, let alone the nation, if it ever got to the Supreme Court. So it seems like they have sort of an impetus. Yeah, we're going to litigate it here at the local level, but we're not going to let it go beyond that. Do you see it that way too, or are you seeing school districts that no, we're going to go for broke here, we're not going to settle, and we're going to litigate as long as it takes to prevail?
That's a tough one. I don't know that I can say necessarily. I think the pronoun issue is it's the number of cases that exist are few and far between. There's not a lot of them that I'm aware of. We often hear, teachers who will call us, which by the way, we actually have a site that we've created called Teachers Don't Lie after Jessica Tapia. Teachers Don't Lie. I think it's .com, but the point is that we are, after Jessica's case, we wanted to attract and get more teachers who need to stand up. And we're finding that a lot of the school districts are really backing down away from that because of Jessica's case.
Yeah.
And then some others that have popped up as well. So I think the school districts, they don't really want to fight that issue. It's not a popular issue for school districts. But I will say that the LGBTQ mafia that's out there, they are pushing this hard. And, we represent the Temecula Valley Unified School District. And we secured a victory initially when a preliminary injunction was sought against the school district because the school district adopted the policy that would inform parents if a child was seeking to transgender. And so, of course, the school district was sued. They were also sued because they passed a policy that would prohibit the teaching of critical race theory as a valid, legitimate theory. And so both of those policies came up and they were sued by a legal organization called Public Counsel, of course, representing the Teachers Association of the school district and some of the students. And when they came to get an injunction to try to prevent this parental informed policy, we prevailed in the Superior Court in Riverside County. Then they have it on appeal, and so it's the appeal has been filed with the California appellate courts. We're in state court. We're not in federal court.
Yeah, and
so we'll be litigating that on appeal. Concurrently, the Chino Valley Unified School District was sued in San Bernardino County, and there a judge who's just extremely hostile ruled against the school district and claimed that the policy was unlawful. And so between these two cases, there's going to be some decisions that come out about the parental information, that this policy providing parental info, and so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch over the next several years. I'm sure you're familiar with the case Mirabelli versus Olson. This is the Escondido School District. It's over the same kinds of issues we're talking about, and that case was filed in the federal court. And of course, it seems like they have a friendly judge, Judge Roger Benitez, who has issued an injunction, at least preliminarily, against these parental exclusion policies. But now this case is expanded, and this might be one of those that,
Mark, just to be clear real quick, that in Mirabelli, what it is, it's conservative parents, teachers filing the lawsuit against the Escondido School District saying, we want to know, you can't hide this information from us. And the federal judges ruled favorably toward those plaintiffs, and that case is being handled by some good friends down out of Escondido. Some lawyers, that is.
So, Robert, who is Danny Roberson? This is a case I think you're representing now. He is, well, I'll let you tell the story. It's pretty interesting.
So you're speaking of, sorry, I have so many cases. This is the one out of
let me just read. I took it directly from your website. Let me read this, and this will sort of tee up this conversation. In May of 2024, Danny Roberson, a biological man who identifies as a transgender woman and works in the children's section of a library, filed a lawsuit in Missouri State Court alleging defamation against Rachel, I think her name is pronounced Hornalak, and Grace Church. The complaint specifically alleges that Grace Church hosted a civic engagement panel encouraging church members to engage with their community. I mean, that sounds acceptable. During this panel, though, one panel member mentioned that a transgender individual was working at the children's section of the library and that these are the types of issues parents need to know and speak up about. The complaint further claims that Hornalak's appearances on podcast and constitutionally protected Facebook posts defamed him. And the plaintiff is seeking to hold the church liable for holding the civic engagement panel and publishing the audio and video of the panel, I guess, on various social media platforms. So are you familiar with this one or someone else? Okay.
Yeah. So Rachel, her pronunciation is Homalak. And so Rachel, she's just a parent, wonderful lady. And she, it's interesting how this came about because, she went to by the way, she's a member of this church, Grace Church there in St. And she was on the worship team, and she took a child, and they went into the public library, and there's a man dressed as a woman in the who's working for the library, who is in the children's section. He's in charge of the children's section of the library. And it's interesting. Well, why do you have to be in charge of the children's section of the library? Why is it that, they put him there?
Yeah.
And so here he is dressed as a woman, and Rachel comes out. She says, "This is crazy." Which one of those places that you feel like, hey, if my child says, "Hey, I want to go to the library, and can I just go spend a few hours and drop me off?" Okay. Yeah. Mom drops her off at the library. She goes in, she's going to read books. And, in the old days, you would have thought, wow, this is just a studious child and wants to, what safer place might there be?
Exactly.
So she, what Rachel did is she came back and she just, she started posting on social media that people should know that there's a guy dressed as a woman who's working and employed there. And she also spoke with the administration of the library and said, this is inappropriate. I'm not telling you you need to fire him or anything, but he shouldn't be working in the children's section of all places.
Right.
And then thereafter, the church has a cultural impact team. And what they do is they hold meetings like many churches do now about what's going on in the community. And these are, folks who may be a little more politically informed, culturally informed. And so they did a panel, and she was one of the panel members that was asked to be there, and she addressed what was going on in the library. Now, there was a lot of social media that went out. She was asked to speak in some different places. And one of the things that she did, she actually went to a school board meeting and painted, as I recall, the picture I have is, painted a beard on her chin, and went and dressed like a guy and spoke at this, or excuse me, I said school board meeting, not the school board meeting. I believe it was either the county board meeting or the public library meeting. And she said, she's making a point that, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And you have this person here. And so she thought, this isn't right. So bottom line is this gentleman, Danny Robertson, ends up suing. This is this is the guy who dresses as a woman, sues. And some of the claims are just really outrageous. One of the things that he doesn't like is that I think she might have called him she might have used the term transsexual, maybe transvestite, cross-dresser, some things like that. Well, he doesn't like those terms.
Right.
And for him, I forget the term he used, but it's, some different term. And, he didn't use the proper letter in the alphabet that this particular one would identify as.
Yeah.
And so he ends up suing. And he claims defamation and, but everything that's said that I can see at this point in time it's just plain fact, plain truth. And so he files this lawsuit, and of course he takes statements way out of context. He says things that are frankly just not accurate in terms of what Rachel said. So, in the end, we have a motion to dismiss coming up in a couple weeks. We filed a motion to dismiss his lawsuit, and Lord willing, we win. But it's interesting. That's what's happening in the culture today. In 2007, Mark, I mentioned the first law in California. I brought this up. We filed a lawsuit. I said in 2007 that you're going to have men cross-dressing. You're going to have men trying to get into women's locker rooms. You're going to have men at various gyms. This is not going to stop. It started with the public school, with the redefinition of sex in California public school.
That's right. And just to remind our listeners that the redefinition was sex was changed from biological or what's known as natal sex to one's perceived sex, perceived identity, which has opened the Pandora box that we've been talking about. And people, whenever you bring these things up, they say, "Oh, you're just making the slippery slope argument." It's such an easy argument to make, but it has indeed happened. People now, it's one thing to be able to identify with another gender. Of course, people can think whatever they want to. It's another thing altogether to force that subjective identity onto other people in violation of their constitutional rights. And that's what you're having to defend against, because it's happening all over the country.
All over the country. And kids, especially in public schools, kids are being forced to be in a locker room, change with kids of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
It's happening all over, and everyone thought I was crazy when I shouldn't say everyone, but when the law passed, when the initial law passed in California in 2007, we filed a lawsuit and said that, we challenged the law, we challenged it based on privacy. And, unfortunately we knew that it was a case that we had to file, but we'd likely lose at the time because California's policy laws were not great.
Yeah.
On privacy laws were not great. And then there's no provision in our Constitution that says stupid laws are unconstitutional. And so the Constitution doesn't prevent stupid laws. The Constitution has limited protection. And so it was very difficult in that case to be able to sit back and try to make a constitutional argument. There just isn't. There's not one based upon the First Amendment right of speech, free exercise of religion, et cetera, back then to try to challenge a state law that redefined sex. And so, we did file, but look what we're dealing with. We're dealing with that. And in another case, we had a Pastor Josh Blevins, who came and he spoke out against the appointment or potential appointment of another pastor in town to the library board. And why did he speak out? Because that gentleman is a gay pastor of probably a gay church who, as I understood, did a drag queen story hour in his church. So I hate to even call it a church. And what ended up happening is Pastor Josh Blevins went and spoke against the appointment of this pastor, saying this man shouldn't be on the library board. And he ended up getting, Pastor Blevins, our client, ended up getting sued because he spoke out against the appointment of this man. And thankfully in that case, there as well, we filed a motion to dismiss and we prevailed. We won. Case is closed as to the pastor. And the city is still being sued for alleged discrimination, or I should say the county board library commission is being, continuing to be sued. As for our individual pastor, but that's kind of where this stuff is going is these radical organizations on the other side are going after individuals who speak out against them. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear Kamala Harris speak about fascism, and I hear the other side talking about fascism, well, friends, that is the epitome of being fascist. That is this woke agenda on the other side will seek to censor you if you do not agree with them. They will silence you. They will threaten you. They will publicly come and bring a lawsuit against you, even though they have no case because we have a right to free speech. They will do whatever they can. And interesting, some of the things that you're hearing of late in the media, and I know I'm going a little bit more broad here, Mark, but I think the point is important. And the point is, I've heard Hillary Clinton talk about there needs to be some limits on our free speech to prevent misinformation. I'm starting to hear some national leaders in the Democrat side beginning to say this type of thing. That is fascist, because we should have the right as Christians to hold a religious belief and actually share that belief that these trans ideologies are threatening, but that this is the kind of thing where they would likely come and then they, like I said, we've got two lawsuits in, right in the heartland of America, challenging individuals who come out and spoke out against this. And that's where I say, the upcoming election is critically important, but people have to wake up to see this. And this is the type of stuff you see in these countries where there's dictators, where you have in Nazi Germany, where they come and they force censorship. They make your position illegal and they will punish you for that. And so, we've seen parents be arrested, investigated because they spoke out against trans ideologies. We know that their, teachers are losing their jobs because they speak out against the trans ideology. Or what's happened is they've scared them enough that they don't say anything. And so they censor them. And so it's interesting because I do think that one of the greatest threats to America today is, it's not Russia, it's not China. It's internally, it is this trans ideology to try to make an argument that you can choose whatever gender you want to be. And everyone else, if you don't agree with it, you're the problem, you're the bigot. You have to accept this. Otherwise, you're going to lose your job. You're going to be sued. You might lose your house, everything that goes along with it. I think that's the greatest threat to America today. And it's frankly, it's up to parents at this point to really do what they can to stand up and speak out and fight and be willing to risk whatever it takes to protect their kids.
Attorney Robert Tyler, I couldn't agree with you more. We could probably go on for another hour on this topic and others, and probably should, but unfortunately we got to leave it someplace. And, I think you've summarized the threats against Americans individually and the threats to our Constitution so well. I'm reminded of a statement by George Orwell, who wrote in 1984, An Animal Farm. He said, "The day will come when merely speaking the truth will be a revolutionary act." And given the lawsuits that we've talked about today, it's hard to argue that we're not already there. So I want to encourage our listeners to stand up for truth, to become educated and aware of the kinds of issues that we're talking about, and to reach out to people like Robert Tyler and his firm, Advocates for Faith and Freedom. If you're one of those whose religious liberties or constitutional liberties are being infringed upon. Robert, how can people follow you and your work? What's the best way to contact you?
Sure. Our website is www.faith-freedom.com. Faith, Faith freedom.com. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook, trying to get things up where maybe we might get on some other social media platforms as well. And, we have people contact us, send us an email, share what's going on, and also have an 800 number. Folks can get that right off the website. Give us a phone call as needed.
Awesome. Robert Tyler, thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you, our listening audience, for tuning in for today's broadcast of Say What. This is part of the ministry of Protect Our Kids. You can go to our site, pok.org, to find out more about the issues that we've been discussing today. And we look forward to seeing you on next week's episode. See you then.